This video is part of our Qt C++ GUI Development Intermediate course, and we will be using the basic knowledge we learned from the Graphics View Framework chapter. If you are interested in these basics and many more things we cover in the course, you can check it out from the link here, which is going to be shared in the video description below. In this lecture, we're going to move on with our design of the Flappy Bird game. We're going to build the pillar item, which is going to be moving from left to right and hopefully hitting the bird and make you lose. This is the project the way we left it in the last lecture. And the first thing we want to do is to create our pillar item class. So we're going to do that. Add a new class. We're going to call this pillar item. It's going to inherit QObject by default. We're going to change this in a minute. And we're going to go to the header and include a class we call QGraphics item group. I think we have that. And we're going to copy this and make sure we inherit this class. And in the CPP file, we don't want to do any parent initialization because our constructor is going to change a bit. We don't want any parent parameter here. We're going to go to the top again and modify the pillar item constructor to take nothing again. Another thing we want is to also inherit QObject because we want this pillar item to have signals and slots. I think this is the first time we do this, but if you happen to need signal and slot support on your QGraphics items, you can do double inheritance, inherit a QGraphics item class, and also inherit QObject, and that's what we're going to do here. We're going to say public QObject. We're going to put a comma here to separate these guys, and this is going to work just fine. Now we have support for signals and slots in our graphics item. Another thing you should look at, I don't think we have done that before, is look at this class in the documentation. This class provides a container that treats a group of items as a single item. And this is exactly what we want. Why do we want this? We're going to have two graphics that are going to represent both the top pillar and the bottom pillar. Remember, in our game, we're going to have two of these guys. One is going to be to the top, the other is going to be to the bottom, and we're going to have a little space in between them where the bird is going to pass through. So that's why we have two items, but we want to be able to manipulate these two guys as one. That's why we group them in a QGraphics item group class. I hope this makes sense. We're also going to include QGraphics pixmap item. Let's do that. QGraphics pixmap item. And we are going to put in a private section for the class here. And we're going to put in our pixmap items. One for the top pillar, another for the bottom pillar. And now that we have this, we need to initialize this guy. What we're going to do is go in the CPP file and say top pillar. It's going to be equal to new QGraphics pixmap item. And we're going to pass in a pixmap. And the pixmap is going to be of the pillar image here. We're going to copy its path and we're going to put that in here. This is going to do. And we can put a comma and also initialize the bottom pillar, which is going to be exactly the same thing as we have to the top here. Let's copy the code. I don't want to type all this again. I'm going to put that in here, and it's going to work just fine. Now we have our pillar item. Now that we have the pillar items in place, if we create an object of this guy, the two pillars are going to be on top of each other. Let's create an object of these guys and actually show you this. There is no reason why we can't. We're going to include pillar item, and we are going to create a pillar item object, pillar item pointer pillar, and we're going to say new pillar item. It's not going to have any parent, and we want to add that to our scene. So scene, add item, and we're going to say pillar. Before we run the application, I want you to know something. Let's go back to our pillar item class. You see that we defined these guys, but we didn't add them to the group. So if you run the application, you're not going to see anything That's because you didn't add this guy to the current group, which is powered by QGraphics item group. We can go back to the documentation of these guys, and I'm going to show you that we have a method that is called add to group, and it is here, and it adds the item you pass in as a parameter here to the group, and the children of this item are also going to be added to the group. So we really need to call add to group and add these pillars to this group here. Let's do that. We're going to say add to group. We already have access to this method because this is a QGraphics item group class. That's what we are subclassing here in the header. I hope this is clear. So add to group top pillar, not top level, pillar, and add to group bottom pillar. Now we can run the application and see the pillar item we create in widget CPP file show up in our scene. We have our thing here. I want you to see what happens here. So we have the pillar. This is exactly what we want. It is not displayed in full because it is really long. But when you resize to show this thing's full screen, you're going to see it. But we just want to see half of this thing. So why is it here? It is being added to the 0, position, and its top left corner is exactly in the center of the scene. So to have these things show up in different places, we need to move the top pillar up a given distance, and we need to move the bottom pillar down a little bit so that we have some space between these guys. That's what we're going to do in pillar item. We are going to say top pillar. We're going to start by that and move it a little bit to the top. We're going to set the position on this guy, set pose. I think we have access to this method. We're going to start by the center, point F00. Remember, we want to move this guy to the top and to the left because we want it to be exactly in the center on the x-axis. So we're going to subtract as we usually do. We're going to say Q.F, and we are going to subtract half the width of the bounding rectangle of this thing. So we're going to say top pillar bounding rect width divided by 2, and we are going to say top pillar bounding rect height. We want to subtract the entire height because we want to move it all the way to the top, but we don't want it to also touch the 0, axis in Y. We want it to move a little further up by a 60 distance. So you can put in whatever you want here, but this is what we're going to use here. Okay, and we seem to have a problem here. What is that? I think we need to move this guy to here and remove this here. Let's see what we get, and we are fine. This is our point. This is the x coordinate, and this is the y coordinate. We are subtracting the entire height because we want this thing to go all the way to the top, and we put in an extra move amount of 60 to have some space between the pillars. Now that we have this, I want to try this and show you this in action. The top pillar should move to the top a little bit, and we're going to have the bottom pillar exactly where it was before. And this is what we have here. Okay, the top pillar is in the center on X, and it moved up in Y because of this 60 we added here. We want to also move the bottom pillar to the left and move it down so that we have more space between these things. The way we do that, we're going to say bottom pillar. You must know how to do this already based on what we did before. We're going to set pose, and we're going to say Q point F00. That's where we want to start from the center of the scene. And we are going to add, because we want this thing to move down in Y, so we want to add something. We're going to say Q point F, and we're going to say minus, because we want this guy to be moving to the left on X. That's why we put this minus here. We are going to move by half the width of the bounding rectangle. So we're going to say bottom pillar bounding rect width divided by 2. And we're going to go down. And remember, the bottom pillar was already at 0. So all we really need to do is move it down by 60 so that we have some more distance from the top pillar. We're going to add 60. So we're going to say 60 here, and we're going to close this with a semicolon. And we're going to run and see what we have so far. This is what we want. We also want to go in widget UI and give this guy a good default size. We don't want to keep resizing this. We're going to run again, and this is much better. Okay, and you see that this is the center of our scene. These guidelines are really helping out. Now that we have the pillar designed, we want to make it move from left to right. How do we do that? We're going to use a QProperty Animation. So let's go back to our pillar class, and we're going to go to the top and include QProperty Animation. What we want to animate is the X location of the pillar item because we want it to move from left to right. So for example, it's going to be going from 250 to minus 250, and it's going to swipe through the visible area of the scene. So this is going to be a custom property because it doesn't already exist on this class here. We're going to have to define it. So to create this property, we're going to say QProperty here. And I think Qt Creator should be able to help out. Let's see if it does. And if you go down here, you see that it's going to give you what you can put in here. I like to hit enter, and it's going to be QReal, and the name is going to be X, and we're going to hit enter. You see that it gives us the name of the property. We have a getter for the property, we have a setter for the property, and we have a signal when something changes about this property. We don't want this signal, so we're going to take this out. Once we have this in, we can generate the methods that are going to help this work. We need a method for this setter, and we need a method for this getter here. The way you do that, you select this QProperty thing, and you're going to hit refactor, and you're going to generate missing QProperty members. When you click on that, look what happens. We have a setter, and we have a getter generated for us. And another reason we subclassed QObject was so that we could do this, because this is also part of the Qt meta object system, and you only have access to that when your class somehow subclasses QObject. So know this, for your animations to work like this, and I mean your custom animations, you need to have QObject subclassed by your class here. And of course, another bonus is going to be access to the signals and slots mechanism, which is pretty cool. So one thing I want to do, I want to move these methods in the CPP file. So I'm going to move definition to the CPP file. Let's go up again and also move the setter method. And now this is moved. And now that we are here, you see that also Qt Creator has created this member variable that is going to control this property here. This is pretty cool. So let's create our property animation. We are going to go down here and say QProperty Animation, and it's going to be X animation because that's what we want. We're going to go down in the CPP file and initialize this thing. We're going to go down here and say X animation equals new QProperty Animation. And if you look at the constructor of this things, it wants the object that is going to be the target, it wants the property name, and it wants a parent. The target is going to be this class here because we are animating a property that is defined in this class. I hope this makes sense. We're going to pass in the name of the property we want to animate, and the name of that guy is right here, so it is X. You pass it in inside quotes like this, and you need to give this property a parent for memory management purposes. Okay, now that we have the animation in place, we want it to start from somewhere. We want the Y position of the pillar item here to be random because we want to make the game a bit challenging. We don't want the bird to be in the same Y position. We want it to be able to go up and down to pass through the pillar item. That's why we need to randomize the Y position of the pillar item. I hope this makes sense. So what we're going to do, we're going to define a random value that we're going to be adding to the Y position of the pillar item. We're going to do int Y pose, and we're going to use a class from Qt to give us the random number, and that one is going to be QRandomGenerator. I think that's how it's called. We're going to include that QRandomGenerator. It is this one. So the way we're going to do that, we're going to say QRandomGenerator. We're going to call a method called global, and we're going to say bounded, and we're going to pass in the highest value of this number. So it's going to give us something between 1 and 150. We're going to put in 150 here because that's what we want to use. And if you want to know about this class, all you have to do is select it, hit F1, and you're going to learn all you can about it. I'm not going to talk any more about this because this is really not our focus. We just want to get a random number, and this class happens to make it easier. So we have our Y position, which is random. The next thing we want to do is also add some random value to the X position of the pillar because we want it to come from different X positions. Again, this is going to make the game a bit less predictable and a little harder on the part of the player. We're going to define another integer. We're going to say X randomizer because that's what it is. And we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to say Q random generator. We're going to say global, and we're going to say bounded, and we're going to pass in a value of 200. We're going to see how this works. If we like this, we're going to keep that. And now we can set the position of this pillar item. We're going to say set pose. And we're going to start by 0 Q point F00, and we're going to also add a Q point F. We want that to start from 260 in X, and we're going to add in our randomizer, X randomizer, and in Y we want this guy moved to Y pose, and this is going to give us the position that we want. Okay, now that we have our randomizers in place, we want to start and set some properties on this QProperty animation here, X animation. The first thing we want to set is the start position. So we're going to say X animation set start volume. We're going to let it start at 260 plus X randomizer. That's what we want to use because we want this to be a bit random. We want it to end at minus 260. When it's past the visible area of the scene, we're going to set and value. It's going to be minus 260. This is going to work just fine for us. We can also set the easing curve, X animation, set easing curve. And what this method does, it sets different ways your animation is going to be carried out. Let's look at Q animation, Q variant animation. It is the same interface they are conforming to, so this is going to be exactly what we want to use. You can look at this guy, Q easing curve. It provides easing curves for controlling animations. And I think there are many values you can set to these guys, but let's click on this enum and click on this guy again. They give you different easing curves you can use, and you can look at this if you want. What we want to use here is the linear easing curve. So I'm going to pass this in our set statement here to set the easing curve. The last thing we want to set is the duration for this animation. So how long it's going to take. We're going to say set duration, and we're going to say 1/2 second. We're going to see how this works. And after we have this, I can't wait to start this animation. We're going to say start, and it's going to start animating. Okay, now that we have this, we can try and play with this and see how it works. Remember, we created our animation here. It is going to be working on the X animation. And what it's going to do is move this guy from left to right. That's what we want. It's going to start from the start value, which is 260 plus X randomizer. So it's going to be far to the right. It's going to end at minus 260. It's going to go to the far left of the screen, and it's going to follow this easing curve. There is one problem, and I want you to really see this in action. I'm going to try and run the application, and it should animate because we have started the animation, and it's not animating. Why is that? We are not changing the X location of the item here in the sector of this pillar item here. For the animation to actually work, you need to modify the setter here to modify the position of the item. This is the chance they give you to modify things about your own classes, and you have to do something in this setter here. So this is key. If you don't do this, your animation is not going to work. So what we need to do besides setting this mx here, this member variable, is use it to modify some aspect about this class here. We want to set its x position, so we're going to say set pose. We're going to start from 0 and 0, 0, and we're going to add q.f, and we're going to say x, and we need to pass in the y position of the pillar, and this should not be random because it is the y position that we computed here, and this is a good time to copy this and actually put that in the header file. So we're going to do that. We're going to say y pose here, we define it, we go back in the CPP file, and we take out this int here. We are just modifying the value for this guy, initializing it, I should say, and we're going to pass that y position here. Now we should have our animation working exactly the way we want. Let's try and run and see what happens. You see that it comes in place and it moves around. Okay, our application is running. If we try to run it again, to me it looks like it's starting in the center, and I really want to be sure. The way we can test this, we can include QDebug. Let's do that. This is the pillar item CPP file, so we're going to include QDebug, and we're going to print out the position of the item as it moves from left to right. We're going to say QDebug. This is a good way to test this. Pillar position, and we're going to say X. We can run again, and this is going to remove all doubt because we want to make sure this is working exactly the way we want. You see that it keeps moving, and it is starting from 283, and it is not starting from the center, so we are fine. Another thing you need to take care of is remove this pillar item when it is out of the visible area of the screen, because we don't need this object anymore, and if we don't remove it, it's just going to lay in memory, eating up space that could be used to do other things. So what we want to do is put in a destructor that is going to tell us that we have deleted this thing. Let's do that. We're going to say pillar item. This is going to be easy, and we're going to implement this in the CPP file. And we're going to say QDebug, deleting pillar. This is going to be just fine. So when do we delete this pillar? Well, we do that when the animation here finishes, because that's when we don't need this pillar anymore. So we're going to say connect, X animation, and we're going to say pound symbol, QProperty Animation. Finished. We want to do something when the animation finishes, and we want to connect this guy to a lambda function. We're going to capture everything in the context. We're going to pass in an empty parameter list, and we're going to put in our body just like this. Inside here, we want to remove this guy from its scene, so we're going to say scene, remove item, and we need to include QGraphics scene to be able to do that. So let's do that. Include QGraphics scene. Let's do that, and let's go down and complete this thing. We're going to say scene, remove item, and we're going to say this. After that, we're going to delete this because it becomes our responsibility to manage the memory of the item we just removed from the scene. And we just removed this item, the current object of this class, so we're going to delete this. And this is going to take care of things. Now we can clean this up, and we're going to run. The objective is to see if the destructor is called when the animation finishes. Okay, so we can also debug animation finished. For you to just see this, no problem. We're going to close this and we're going to run. And watch your debug output pane, because that's where the information is going to be. And animation finished, deleting pillar, we are working fine. The next thing I want to do is to be able to add multiple pillars for the user to be able to move the bird around. Right now, we just have one pillar, but we just want to have multiple pillars. We are actually going to take this out. We don't need this pillar anymore here. And we are going to go in the scene and do that there. We're going to go in the header of the scene. We're going to include pillar item. We're going to put in a private method. I think it is private. Yes, it is. So we're going to say private void set up pillar timer. This is the method that is going to set up a timer that is going to be adding pillar items at given intervals. We will also need to put in a timer. So we're going to say include, we're going to include that Q timer. You already know this class probably. So we're going to say down here, Q timer, pointer pillar timer, and we're going to implement this method in the CPP file. The first thing we're going to do is initialize the pillar timer. So we're going to say pillar timer equals new timer, new Q timer, and we want to give this guy a parent, and we want to do something when this timer times out. So we're going to say connect pillar timer. We're going to say pound symbol Q timer, timeout. That's the signal we want. And we also are going to put in a lambda function. We're going to capture everything in the context. We're going to put in an empty parameter list. Let's do that. And we put in our body. We're going to close this. And when the timer times out, we're going to create new pillar items. So we are going to say pillar item, pointer pillar. We're going to initialize this. It's not going to have any parent. And after we have this, we're going to add this to the scene. We are going to say add item, and we're going to say pillar item. And after we have this in, we want to start this timer at given intervals. So we're going to say pillar timer start, and it's going to be adding a new pillar item each second. We pass in 1000 milliseconds here. And what we want to do in the constructor of the scene is call setup pillar timer. And we are using this scene in widget CPP. We can check that here. Let's make sure. And we can run the application. But before we do that, I want you to try and put together what you expect this application to do. We are putting a scene here, which is going to be displayed by our view. And our scene is going to set up the pillar timer. This pillar timer is going to be timing out every second. And each time it times out, it's going to create a new pillar item and add that to the scene. The thing about pillar items is that they are going to move from left to right, and they are going to be added at different locations. You see, we set the X position here, and the Y position is also going to be random. And as it moves from left to right, it's going to go through this animation here. The animation is going to last 1/2 second. And when the animation is done, we're going to remove the pillar from the scene, and we are going to release the memory for this pillar item because we are good C++ citizens. We're going to run and see what we get. Let's wait a minute. And it looks like things are coming from the center. Why is that? Okay, let's go up and see if we can figure out what is going wrong here. I think we are adding our items to group a little later. I'm going to take this and move that exactly after I define these items so that the transformations we make here also affect these items immediately. I think this is our problem. I'm going to run and see what we get. Look at what we have here. You see that the pillars are coming in, they are being deleted, and they have different Y positions. You see that they are not at the same Y location, and this is going to make the game a little more challenging. So this is what we set out to do in this lecture, to set up the pillar items and make them work exactly the way we want. And this is really simple. You just define the class here. One thing you need to remember is to subclass this class, which is going to group our pillars as one thing we can manipulate. Another thing is the property you set up here that is going to be used by this animation. This is key. You have to define this custom property for it to be used in this animation as we did here. And we set up the start value, the end value, and we start the animation for things to start moving exactly the way we want. So this is all for this lecture. Go ahead and finish up. In the next one, we're going to start and work on our bird item and make it go through the pillar items that we just designed.